There is a lot of excitement and anticipation as we make our way to health class for the first time. We all take our seats, giggling and full of questions. Our teacher brings out the infamous question box. She tells us that we can ask anything we want. There is a question I've been harboring for quite some time and never had the courage to ask. I nervously scroll my question on the torn piece of paper before hustling it to the front of the class and dropping it in the box. We could hardly contain our giggles as the teacher did her very best to move point by point through the course materials provided by the school. Then came the question box. She answered a few basic questions. How are babies made? What's a tampon? Can boys get pregnant? And then she read, what is a homosexual? Oh, my heart sinks in my chest as she reads my question aloud. She proceeds to explain, a homosexual is a boy who likes to kiss other boys and a girl who likes to kiss other girls. This includes boys who like to play with dolls and do more girly things, or girls who like to dress in boys' clothes and play with boys' toys. A ball of nerves hits my stomach with a thud. She literally just described me. My mind is spinning as I feel the entire class is looking at me. My big secret is out, and I didn't even know it was something I needed to hide. Until now. As the bell rings, I quickly shuffle out of the class in an effort to avoid the pointed fingers and jeers of my classmates. I've never felt so exposed and vulnerable before. And I know from this moment on, nothing will be the same.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 4, Health Class, or Physical Education and Wellness Class, as it's called today. We're still throwing it back to 1988, still in grade 4. And today, we're investigating the early phases of sexual development and how we were educated about it via our school system and peers. Here to help us are child psychologist Dr. Kate, she's back, and curriculum expert Dr. Callahan. Bronwin unpacks how one question changed their whole middle childhood, and I dive into the horror of being on the lists. And at the end, we reveal our first crushes. You best start thinking about yours. It's a tell-all kind of episode. It's time to squirm. It's time to learn. Ready or not, here we go. This is Late in 88.
I totally remember putting that question in the question box. What is a homosexual?
The fact that you asked the question is even that much more powerful, right? You're asking that question and then you almost got, it's almost like feeling punished for asking the question.
Yep. Yeah.
That's the barbed wire around the whole topic. And that's like the societal barbed wire that as a kid, you probably could maybe feel, but you weren't sure. So you do that thing that kids do, which is very natural and normal and healthy. And you ask a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of us as kids felt the sting of asking a question we didn't know was controversial, or personal, for that matter? All we wanted was a simple answer. As we spoke, it was clear that sexuality was beginning to be a bigger question for both of us at that age. Are prepubescent 8-year-olds aware of their sexuality? We asked child psychologist Dr. Kate what the science tells us of the development of this age group.
Typically by preteen, kids have a pretty good sense of their attractions. It's not uncommon to look back and be like, oh, I always felt like I was different in a certain way, but I couldn't put my finger on it or I didn't know why. But it's more concrete in terms of kids being able to talk about attractions or lack thereof. There's so much still to learn about asexuality and being aromantic, and still a place where there's like a lot of stigma around that. We don't really think of it as an identity in and of itself, but it very much is. The message here is there's lots of variability here. There's kids who know that they're gay in elementary school. There's kids that come out later in adulthood. There's gender diverse people who are super clear from a really young age. And then there's others that like come out way later in life, whether it's because they weren't consciously aware of their identity or they weren't in a psychologically safe space or community to do that. That really depends. But in a really supportive and accepting family and community, kids can really know these things about themselves at really young ages. And it's important to talk to them about it and be curious and obviously non-judgmental.
It's clear that we as children didn't have the language to describe our varied identities in 1988. So we wanted to understand what was the Alberta educational curriculum around gender and sexuality at that time. To find out more, we spoke to Dr. Tanya Callahan, an associate professor with the University of Calgary Workland School of Education, author of Homophobia in the Hallways, Heterosexism and Transphobia in Canadian Catholic Schools. Dr. Callahan's research explores Catholic resistance to anti-homophobia and transphobia education in both curriculum and educational policy.
We do live in a homophobic, transphobic, heterosexist culture that forces us into what Adrienne Rich has called compulsory heterosexuality. So that means that all of our institutions, whether they be schools, hospitals, the judicial system, is infused by that worldview that we can barely escape. We are doing our best, those of us who are doing anti-oppression work in education. So you're going to find homophobic worldviews infusing all education systems. But it's a notion that those of us in education use, which is something called the null curriculum. Nell Noddings writes about this quite a lot. What that means is null is like -0, right? So what is not in the curriculum tells you quite a lot about the kind of culture that we live in. When it comes to gender and sexual diversity, it's the absence of any discussion in schools. So it's actively rooted out and not discussed and not overtly present in the curriculum by design. People do that on purpose because they fear that, if we tell the little kindergarten to grade 12 grades that there are other ways of living besides being a heterosexual procreation person, cisgender, etc. There are other ways of being, other ways of expressing yourself. Then parents and others are fearful that children will just go that direction and say, that's an option for me. So that's one of the reasons why they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the existence of homosexuals, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and other identity markers that people may choose, because they're fearful that just by talking about it, it's going to invite people to adopt what they call a lifestyle. Many of us who are members of that community would take issue with that term because it's not a lifestyle. Rock climbing is a lifestyle that you choose. Your sexuality or your gender identity is not a lifestyle choice. It's something that you're born with, and it's a beautiful form of diversity that should be celebrated, but unfortunately is one that many people fear. And that's why you will not find a lot of discussion of that in the curriculum. I used to be a high school English teacher. One of the common novels for the time, because you're looking at the 80s, was The Wars by Timothy Finley, a Canadian author. He's a gay man, so that would never be mentioned. There is some subtle reference to homosexuality in the book that would not be mentioned in any kind of curricular guide or talking about the author. Or when we look at art history, for example, Michelangelo, nobody's going to talk about the man's sexuality that we have been able to unearth through art historians, incredible work. So that sort of thing, even if it's known by the adults in the building or by people with advanced degrees at the university, they should know these kinds of things. They actively refuse to mention it to the students. So they don't want to tell students that we're reading a gay author or that we're reading a lesbian author or a non-binary person or a bisexual author, even though we are benefiting from that person's beautiful artistry, right? We're reading their wonderful novel that they created. So that's an example of the null curriculum too. We might use their work, use their beauty of what they've created, but not tell us anything substantive about their personal life and how they are as a human in this world. Curriculum is something that's glacially slow to change. There have been attempts to modernize curriculum, but even if I haven't actively studied elements of the curriculum from the 80s, I have read it, and I know that it hasn't changed much in Alberta because there's political hot potato everywhere in every province about, no, we don't want to change things to make them more advanced for the young people to learn about gender and sexual diversity.
1988 to now, it's pretty fascinating to learn that not much has changed in the curriculum. Are you surprised?
Sadly, no. And it doesn't even matter what province you're in. It seems that there's a global movement, really, to suppress information and education around the 2S LGBTQIA plus community across the board. And it's frustrating because it's like we had no curriculum, clearly, and guess what? We still are pretty gay. So not talking about it or removing the information from the education system doesn't keep children from being queer or trans. It just leaves them with more questions and a feeling of both being different, othered, and very alone.
Yeah.
These are people who are supposed to teach us things about the world. And meanwhile, they're actively withholding information. Like, these people exist. It would be like actively withholding information about squirrels. Like, why? Squirrels exist. You not talking about squirrels does not mean they don't exist.
Wow. Squirrels and queer people. Got it.
There's a squirrel out there. There's a squirrel out there. I'm like,
I've really found a lot of value in this concept of null curriculum. It's not a term I was aware of. Null curriculum where, okay, we're just not going to include it. And here we are in episode 4, and all of our episodes, all through this journey, this is what we've been talking about. We didn't have language. We didn't have community. We didn't have examples. We didn't know what we were. So I feel like we're living proof of this null curriculum. What happened to you? This health class incident was a result of null curriculum.
yeah, that whole moment really set me on a homophobic path for the next 6 years in an effort to make sure that people didn't know I was queer, while also simultaneously trying to maintain some form of my own authenticity.
Well, and it's so interesting that your teacher's answer really had to do with gender.
Yeah.
I guess the teacher referenced that they kissed.
Right.
That's the sexuality part. And then there's the gender identity part, which we now know are two different things.
Yeah.
But like back then, it was all under one blanket of not the binary of what we like to see.
I do try and give her the benefit of the doubt. It's not like she would know the nuances of sexuality or gender.
If it's null curriculum,
Yeah.
she wouldn't actually have been taught
Yeah.
how to talk about homosexuality.
Yeah.
So then she's put in the position where she's asked a question,
Yeah.
and now she has to answer it from her knowledge and what she thinks is the right thing to say, but she's received no guidance.
Yeah.
So that's the fault of the education system on her.
Yeah.
Because here's the null curriculum. We assume that if we don't talk about it, there's not going to be any questions.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any gay kids. It's very naive.
Totally.
And very reductive. So it actually puts that teacher in a very precarious position. The way that she delivered that in such an insensitive way was enough to create a situation where you shut down and you started having this negative association with your identity.
Yeah.
And so this is the damage of null curriculum.
Like, I actually believe that because I spent so many years hating myself and trying to convince myself that I was not gay, I think that's part of the reason why when I finally did come to terms with it and begin to live authentically, I carry zero shame around that. Like, I am out in every situation, especially in situations where I might come across hostile responses. I'm so galvanized in who I am now. I feel like I'm in an immense position of power. I'm going to live authentically, and I'm going to put myself, like, in the heart of Drumheller and be, like, super out. Despite, like...
People don't know where Drumheller is.
It's the dinosaur place in Alberta. Drumheller is a dinosaur place in Alberta, and if you haven't gone there, then you're missing out.
They start taking a lot more responsibility for their bodies and for things like hygiene. And this sort of happens in like at different times for different kids. There's a lot more need for privacy. So like you think of like a 6 or a 7-year-old will often unabashedly get changed in front of whatever random relative. Whereas moving into 8, 9, 10, you start to really need a lot more privacy. Body image challenges start to creep up. And then the other really big developmental thing that happens for 8, 9-year-olds is the discrepancy in pubertal timing. This is the group that really feels it the most because there are some 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are starting puberty and there are some who are nowhere near puberty. And that discrepancy in body changes that are obvious to peers creates a lot of challenges, especially as these kids are also trying to figure out what does it mean to be cool? How do I belong? Where do I fit in? Where's my group membership? And it also can create lots of feelings of shame or feeling left behind. There's a lot of really interesting research on the effects of pubertal timing. Female body kids who have early pubertal timing, that's noticeable to their peers is actually a risk factor for things like confidence and anxiety and depression. Whereas male body kids who have early pubertal timing, it ends up being a protective factor where they actually increase in confidence and peer acceptance. So that difference, I think, is always really notable to talk about. There are a lot of 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds who are like feeling and looking and acting really mature. And then there are others who are still very much in like pretend play and still very much like little kids. So that creates some challenges.
There was a shift to being objects. There's an objectification during that period too. Conforming and being objectified. I remember those shifts as being really hard, having to be certain things and then having people watching you and rating you and telling you if you were good or not based on something that you had no control over. Like those are uncomfortable feelings.
It's recess. I'm playing on the schoolyard, running around with a ball, minding my own business. 2 girls in my class run up to me. They're laughing, they're giggling. They've stolen something from the boys. They pass me a scrumpled up piece of paper. See, you're on it. You're at the top. I open it up. There's a list with a graph on it. On one side of the graph, there's attributes: face, legs, butt, chest. And on the other side of the graph are names of a few girls. My name's on there. Top scores for face, that's me. Chest, not so much. But butt and legs, I don't do so bad. If you add them all up, you're at the top, they tell me. You should be happy. I feel disgusting. I feel embarrassed. I want nothing to do with it. These were my friends. Girls grab the paper and run off. They've got other people to show. I'm left wishing I'd never seen it, wishing I was invisible, that I could take my name back and just be a kid again.
Oh, those lists. They were carried on well into grade 5 and 6. I was just so glad I never, ever appeared on them.
They really made me feel powerless. Like Amanda said, they were objectifying. You just felt like an object. And it was over this thing that you had no control over, which was oncoming puberty. And all of a sudden you're being measured by the way that your body is developing and you don't know where it's going. You don't know what's going to happen. You would think, oh, yay, I was on them and I did well. That would be a good thing. But I wanted nothing more than to bury my head in the sand. And I feel like it really affected my interest and my sense of safety around exploring my sexuality.
Yeah, for sure. I knew that the way I related to boys was different than to girls. You're 8, you don't know. It's hard to even explain when you think about it as an 8-year-old, what were those feelings? Boys were outside feelings, but girls are squishy inside feelings. The best way I could describe it, like even at that age, my feelings towards girls was much more intimate. Whereas my feeling with boys was more like, yeah, let's go play Nerf. I didn't want to be close to them, but I did want to be close to girls. And I didn't really know how to reconcile that.
I did have a first crush.
Oh.
Yeah. And kind of came out while we were talking to Amanda. I was thinking about it, and I think you were my first crush, Amanda.
For real?
Yeah.
Really?
Didn't I tell you that? Oh, yeah. I remember. I think those were my first feelings of like, I'm attracted to somebody in a way. I just remember looking at you and being curious about your body.
Yeah,
and like,
there was a lot that was a big thing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, not like in the younger show and tell way, just really being drawn that way and then feeling embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
Even though we were close, it was like a different kind of, it wasn't a friend vibe.
Yeah.
And you and I never did the show and tell thing
No,
together.
but Kate and I did a lot of that.
Right?
Kate was one of my first like crushes during that period. It was intense.
Oh my God, that is the most adorable little 8-year-old love triangle. I'm here for it.
All the crushes of the podcast.
As it turns out, I'm pretty sure that, Ellie, you were my first crush way back then.
What?
Yes. I'm sorry. Just to bring it full circle, I thought about it while we were on the call with Amanda, and Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Wow. What a compliment.
You're cute and you're fun. You're sporty.
Sporty.
Sporty Spice.
I was going to say that and I didn't want to. Spice
Hey.
Girls was past our time.
Whatever. I love Spice Girls. I got a soft spot.
Wow. Thank you.
yeah.
So exciting.
I know.
We all were in this little ecosystem, weren't we? Figuring out these new feelings. I hope you at home, friends, and all this journey we've taken today have been able to think about who your first crush was. And hopefully it was a sweet thing. Maybe it was awkward and uncomfortable. It's all part of it. It's all natural and normal. And I think those are the things we should come away with, along with all the amazing things we learned, was how sweet and beautiful the emerging sexuality of a kid in grade 4 really is.
Totally. And then, moving forward onto our next episode, we are actually going to travel back in time. Ellie and I are going back to Calgary today.
Today's Calgary, not exactly today as in right now.
Yeah, not literally today's right now, but like
I mean, we could.
present day Calgary.
Our last and final episode, episode 5. Join us. We're going to answer the question that we first asked at the beginning.
Yeah.
What if we would have been friends?
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast and consider posting a review or sharing it with your friends. There's other people out there who might like this too, this podcast, and it helps them find our show. Follow us on socials at late.in.88, where we have additional content and welcome you to join the conversation. Thank you to Dr. Tanya Callahan and Dr. Kate Thompson. Your knowledge is invaluable and validates not only our experiences, but I'm sure that of many others. And to our friend Amanda for sharing all about her personal experiences at that age.
Late in 88 is created by Bronwin Parks and Elinor Svoboda. Produced by Natasha Winter. Edited by Elfire Media. Sound design by Bernice Chu. Original music by Aaron Hutchinson. Sound mix by Stephen Barton. Publicity by Nice Marmot PR. Artwork by Feisty Creative. We would like to acknowledge the generous support from Canada Council for the Arts. Thank you for lighting a fire under this project.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.